Christina Ray, one third of fangirls.exe. All right, so welcome back. This episode, I'm going to try and pace myself as much as I can. It's a very lengthy one, but I wanted to do it because I really got excited kind of jumping into the lore of Enhypen. Till this day, so I'm recording this Monday, January 12th at almost 12:30, and we haven't yet completed our Enhypen journey. So there's still a lot that I don't know. And when I first like had my notes ready and stuff like that, it was very much after I think our second Enhypen marathon. So I'm still very like don't know what more I could have linked because again, with what I have for y'all today is a lot to begin with. But again, I'm really excited that I think this is the first time that I personally feel like you could see the astrology playing out. And by astrology, I mean it's not like astrology has created this for Enhypen, not at all. The way that I see astrology and practice astrology is as above, so below, right? Where the cosmos reflect back on us. And it's a mirror, right? Things that happen here on Earth reflect out in the cosmos symbolically. And sometimes, for me personally, that's just a little bit easier to digest. But I need whoever astrologer for Hybe or specifically B-Lift Lab to come front and center because clearly there's either a person who knows what they're doing astrologically or a team of people that really understand timing at a very, very, very high level. Because what do you mean that every time I like pulled a major date for Enhypen's early like history, and I will try to timeline this as easy as possible for y'all. But every time I kept looking, I kept finding like the same signature, the same axis being activated in their chart. And I mean, it was not subtle. It's not something like once is okay, it's cool, it's coincidence. Second time is like, this looks that starts to look a little bit suspicious. And then a third time, I was like, okay, this was a strategy. And regardless of if they were taking astrology into consideration or somebody who's an astrology enthusiast, at least they were trying to match some sort of celestial event. And it's also a good strategy, and I'll explain myself here in a bit. But before we do get into the chart, I do want to say that I would have, I would pay so much money to have been a fly on the wall during the pitch for, this particular group because from a cultural strategist point of view, like who uses astrology on a daily basis as an internal framework, I'm looking at this like, how were they mapping this out? Like, how long far back were they mapping this out? Like, what was the timeline? What did they like? What had to happen in order to get this rollout for this group during this time for it to make sense? Um, and was that plan connected to the concept from the beginning, to the rollout and how they were going to pace themselves? So I would pay anything to literally have been eavesdropping on that meeting. Not that I know Korean, but you know what I mean, like in a way that I would have been able to understand. But again, this isn't astrology made this group successful. That's not what I'm saying. This is astrology is astrologizing, is what I like to say, and meaning that the symbolism and the sequence match the way that the story actually unfolds for Enhypen. And like I said, as above, so below, the cosmos mirror Earth, Earth mirrors the cosmos. That's just how I see things through. And I feel like this is a really important case study and it's worth looking into. So even if you don't care about astrology in that sense and you do care about Enhypen and what I have to say about them, that's fine. Because we're going actually more diving deeper into the timing and the narrative imprinting of Enhypen as a group and how to build a concept that actually sticks. So I'm bringing this case as a case study rather than just an astrology breakdown. I hope that makes sense. Um, okay, so the chart that I have here is for their debut, and it was November 30th, 2020 at 6 p.m. Seoul time zone or in Seoul. That alone, specifically, like astronomically, um, the date and time is very important, but particularly for that part of the world as well, because this time and date really landed on a lunar eclipse day, and not just obviously, it wasn't just a full moon eclipse in Gemini, right? It had this moment of light, right? But it was highly visible actually in that side of the world in particularly. So I think if I'm not mistaken, the United States did have like could see it in some certain places, but it was highly, highly visible in that side of the world for this particular lunar eclipse. Now, why does this matter strategically without the astrology, right? So eclipses even on the astrology world, they're not good or bad. But taking the astrology out of it and just the strategy behind using this celestial event is that brands and entertainment teams can care about eclipse timing because it creates like this collective imprinting. So people might remember what they were doing that day because of that event, right? Because people project meaning and because it might have meant or felt like a bigger moment in of itself, that's why I feel like even if they were not considering the astrology of it, still using it from that strategy point of view in storytelling across history, because obviously we do have, culture events where eclipses are mentioned and, kingdoms got taken over and stuff like that. So there is a built-in symbology or symbolism here that can be used with celestial events. So when a group debuts under this type of event in the sky, it's not just a debut, right? It becomes like a marker in a sense. It's more than just a debut. And Hyphen's chart is pretty loud about this. So in the astrology side, I will add this and I will kind of break down a little bit of what the Enhypen chart um, is. And then again, like I said, this is more of because I'm trying to highlight how well this worked out for them. Obviously, eclipses are very, very intense energies. And so using it for a debut on the astrology side can come with its pros and cons. But I feel like based on the strategies that they, as a group, the team behind the group, um, are just really, really, really either people who have a little bit of astrology knowledge or astronomical knowledge, but at the same time, really, really good branding strategists and just a really good team behind the group. But so I'm going to start with it having a Gemini first house. So the first house is the face of the group here. So they have a Gemini rising. And Gemini is an identity that is multiplicity, duality, right? The twins, switching, evolving, being more than one thing at once. So right away, we're not dealing with a group that's meant to be in one fixed like archetype. box, right? Gemini is a sign of adaptability, and it's contracts. It has two sides, right? Which, based off of what I have an understanding of Enhypen's lore, that fits the vampires immediately, because vampires are literally a dual identity concept. You're human but not human, and then there's desire and danger to it, and then also intimacy but also distance, that is very relatable with the vampire lore and on of itself, right? Now, in the first house we also have the moon, and what this can tell us, because the moon is our emotional body, right? And in a chart like this, it shows what the public feels when they experience them as a group, if that makes sense. So the moon in the first is going to say that the emotional reaction to the group might be immediate. Now, again, I'm not someone who has been following this group from the get-go. So if you are somebody who has been following them for a long time or from the beginning, um, please feel free to also, comment on anything that I might, get wrong or right, that tracks, because again, I don't know much about this group, from what we've reacted thus far, which you can look in our Enhypen playlist. So, but based on this chart, it tells me that people really felt them very quickly. Um, whether that was, during the survival show and on debut. But Gemini also says people don't just feel one thing towards them. They feel multiple things at once, right? Because it is the sign of the twins, duality, right? And there's curiosity and fascination. Obsession can come as well. And just a lot of like questions, if that makes sense. So I feel like this would have definitely brought in an audience that also was ready to like investigate. And again, that can go both ways. Like I said, the way that astrology is a spectrum, right? We have, for example, if I were to say, oh, Gemini, the sign of Gemini is not good or bad, but it does have, think of it like a bar, right? And it has its like very, very good qualities and very negative qualities. And sometimes it can shift through that bar. And so that's how I see astrology, right? That it's not, oh, this sign is horrible or this sign is like the meanest. No, it has a somewhere in the spectrum it will land, right? And so sometimes it can manifest great, and sometimes it can manifest in the bad side of the bar or spectrum. And so when I say these things about like the audience becoming very or being very investigative, um that can, mean like, oh yes, you lured people in who are obsessed with lore and investigating and looking at the little things, but also that can bring in the people who are, you know can become obsessed with knowing too many details, right? But that's not what this reading is about, so let me go back to what I'm trying to say, which means that is why the concept of the group even having a lore so heavily like developed and continuous is perfect for this type of chart, and why people want to and have the time to really sit down with the group and decode it, if that makes sense. Now, another important thing about um, this chart is, if you have, right, the face of the group, the opposite house is the audience. But here's an important thing also, they have the sun, again, because it was on a full moon day, but also eclipse. They have the sun directly opposing the moon. But just to kind of zoom out a little bit, Sagittarius is the sign that carries a lot of meaning, right? A lot about belief, myth, destiny. There's a bigger story type of vibe when it comes to Sagittarius energy. And now in the seventh house represents the other, meaning in this particular case with a K-pop group, the public, the audience, the mirror, right? So strategically, their identity isn't just self-contained, it's constructed in relationship with the audience in mind. So their myth grows through the audience reflecting it back to the group, right? Reacting to it, and choosing to believe it, right? Which I feel like is why today, um, I feel like had I been aware of this group back then, um, it would make sense how the webtoon, didn't just stay the webtoon, and nowadays we have um a anime of the webtoon. So it has expanded, and because I'm pretty sure um the audience's feedback kind of gave that green light to the team to do that. So already with just taking into consideration Gemini rising, the moon in the first house, and the sun in the seventh house, this group is built on dual identity story and audience projection. And again, that's just like the simple basic astrology that I wanted to get into. But the eclipse part is the part that I really want to kind of dive a little bit deeper. So again, you see that we have a complete moon sun opposition in the first house, right? And this is literally an intense energy because at 6 p.m. that day, yes, the sun and the moon were completely opposites, but if I'm not mistaken, I think on my notes I wrote down the exact time that the eclipse had its peak, and I think it was at 6:42 p.m. I think that's the time. So they could have released it at 6:42, but obviously that's not something that they do in for K-pop groups. They either do like 6 p.m., 7 p.m., something like that. So um even the fact that they went with 6 p.m. and it was still at a full moon, but it was like initiating that that eclipse at that time. So there was this intensity to it building up with the eclipse. Now, just to kind of give it to you in plain language, this group's origin story is built again on contrast, mirroring, and tension. So it's one that kind of makes people really like magnetize and like pull in, if that makes sense, right? So again, if we look at the vampire lore or story, um or concept, really, it's not just a dark aesthetic, right? Um, if we look at it from an astrological point of view, the vampire lore would live in the eighth house right here because the eighth house really represents um, transformation, taboo, power, intimacy, sorry, death and rebirth cycles, and really what's hidden beneath like the surface, like things that are very much deep. This is also the house where like trauma lives as well, but that's like more of the personal astrology. But if you look at it, not only do we have what's called a stellium. So this is the Pallas asteroid. You don't need to like worry on that, but that's something for another day. But there is Pluto Jupiter conjunction, and then a pretty much like a Jupiter Pluto Saturn conjunction here in the eighth house. So a lot of heavy Capricorn energy, which Capricorn in and of itself is a very like heavy discipline sign. It also is a sign that likes to have some sort of legacy power. Um, and how this manifests or could manifest in the group story and career, is that this group's story might have been built or is built through pressure and endurance, right? So because Capricorn is structure, Pluto kind of brings that intensity and power, and then adding the planet of Saturn, it is discipline, it is time, and Jupiter adds like that expansion energy to that house. So when these three planets are sitting together in the sign of Capricorn, this is not like instant like momentum, but it is one that with endurance and effort and timing, it will only like grow even more. So it does have the signature of built to last, but with weight, right? So like with tension and pressure applied to them as a group. Um, and again, this is why I kind of whoever designed the concept or time that debuted really understood the assignment here because vampires are not like just they're not airy. Um, they're of the ancient kind, right? They're controlled, they're disciplined because um, they have to walk the earth, making sure that their secret is, safe and stuff like that. They're not a chaotic um archetype, right? It's not they're bound by rules, right? You can't go out in the sunlight, you can't walk during the day if we're going with like regular vampire lore. And so it's very much Capricorn. Yes, we have the energy of Gemini, but that Capricorn stellium kind of brings it down. It grounds that Gemini energy and it kind of gives you that vampire, ancient, human, not human, walking amongst humans type of energy. And so again, that's very Capricorn in the eighth house. Now, I do want to talk about Mercury and Venus in Scorpio in the sixth house right here. Um, because be with Mercury and Venus in the sixth house, the house of like your daily activities, um, your like hobbies, but for groups I like to highlight like because the sixth house is labor too, and training and your craft, right? So Scorpio brings an intensity, almost private, obsessive, precision to this house. And if you ever looked at Enhypen and felt like, oh, this is a very polished group or identity, like control is part of the concept, then that is that those two placement. So if you ever looked at Enhypen and be like, damn, they really do have this like polished identity to the group, it is that placement. And then Neptune in the 10th house in Pisces. What I like about what I like about this placement particularly is that the 10th house is the most visible house in our chart. It is our public image. It is technically like the career, right? And Neptune is very dreamy. It likes to bring illusions, glamour, myth, something you can't fully like identify or grasp. And then Pisces and Neptune together is going to be as Neptunian as it gets. So the public image is meant to be slightly almost unreal, but not in the oh, this is just like fake, but in a myth way. So like literally taking upon almost that mythological storytelling that myths have, right? So like you're watching something that lives between reality and story. So that is what that Neptunian energy brings to their concept because they are a lore heavy group. So that's kind of what I'm trying to say. Um, Now you also have uh the moon and sun kind of making a square. It's not exact because it's like 10 degrees away, but it is still making a square to that Neptune in the 10th house. So what that kind of tells me is that they they have the team behind it really took the time to bake in that lore with them. So they really were committed to almost like the lore part or the mythology behind it to be one of the core things about the group of it of itself because it does have a correlation to that first and seventh house. So it's directly impacting them as the like their image, but also what the public their perception of the group. So, anyways, um, so this is where I kind of wanted to dive a little bit deeper on the eclipse, and here's where I really want you to pay attention to the strategy and not so much the astrology. I just kind of wanted to cover the astrology, um, because again, this is K-pop astrology, but because what I noticed is that the key dates that I kept looking at were really random. It was like they read really like an organized sequence that just kept hitting at that Gemini Sagittarius storyline. And for anyone who doesn't really know, like Gemini and Sagittarius, again, are opposite signs. And like I was saying, Gemini is identity, youth, media, voice, curiosity, and Sagittarius is more like meaning, myth, belief, worldview, the story, right? So if you're building a vampire concept, that axis is works very perfectly, honestly, because it kind of has this opposition of identity versus destiny, human curiosity, and mystic narrative. So one of the things that I wanted to highlight is that during May 2020, we had a nodal shift. And let me see if I can pull up the dates that I want to pull up. Okay, so this was May. Let's do May. I didn't write down the date that it actually went over. Mhm. Okay, so that's the 2nd, the 3rd of May. I think it was like, oh, I went too far. Okay, so yes, so on May 5th, 2020 is when, or the 19th, I think, in South Korea time. I'm looking at Texas time. Um, the nodes, which is where the eclipses happen. So this is oh, right here. Okay. So this is the north node, this is the south node. So whenever you see this in a chart, if you're not familiar with astrology, it just tells you where the eclipses are happening for a period of like 18 months. So there are going to be instances where it's a solar eclipse or a lunar eclipse, partial, all those other ones, and it's going to constantly go back and forth. Um, so for like 2 months, it'll be like eclipse season, right? And that's when a lot of things will be happening in those particular signs. And so in this case, because their face and the public, right? First house, seventh house, Gemini, first house, Sagittarius, seventh house, um, they would have eclipses on those two, on that same axis, on those two signs. So one of the things was that during May of 2020, um, there, when looking at when they started filming, it was said that they had started, or it was rumored, is what I was reading on a Reddit post, that they had might have started earlier May. um, which it would make sense because the nodes were in Cancer and Capricorn. And so on May 5th of 2020, it shifted to the Gemini Sagittarius axis. And if I'm not mistaken, when I was reading the Reddit post, it said that they might have started filming around May 28 because I think um, they were like some promotional pictures that they had to take and stuff like that. And so to me, I'm like, oh my god, they even regardless of where in May they started recording or had any promotional like pre-recording and stuff like that, the notes had already shifted or were about to shift. And so from the get-go, the energy was there. So even before the eclipse happened, right? That fate axis shift into the exact signs that Enhypen later debuts under. So meaning the environment was pretty much like being prepped for their storyline as a group. So as a strategist, I'm gonna see that the collective narrative here is entering that Gemini Sagittarius. So identity meets destiny. And I'm like, okay, I have a group that I want to launch whose concept is literally transformation and myth. I'm gonna start building it around this time. So that's why I always like, that's why I'm during this whole process of me like doing research for this group, I was like, either they are like excellent um strategists, like so good, or they definitely have an upper hand here. Because and again, it can always also just be coincidence. Like I said, the earth reflects the cosmos and it mirrors it back to us. And what I like to say, astrology is astrologizing, because sometimes there are events that happen that is so down to a T of what it astrologically means. And it just happens without you like planning for it and stuff like that. Um, so yes, it could have just been fate, but I would like to think that maybe somebody was sprinkling in some insight there is what I would like to believe. But come June 6, 2020, right? There is an eclipse, our first eclipse, in Sagittarius at 15 degrees. So that was the first eclipse on that axis that kind of jump started the eclipse cycle of the Gemini Sagittarius. Now, this is where the story begins, right? Not publicly, but very structurally. So it kind of set the tone for them before they were even Enhypen. The following eclipse after that one, obviously, was the day that they debuted, which is the November 30th, 2020. And they debuted it with 8 degrees of Gemini moon and 8 degrees of Sagittarius. So, um, with that energy right in mind, it was literally like synchronicity at its finest, right? So their origin moment is branded with like a collective pause and remember this type of stamp. It was like cosmically approved, if you would like to take it that way. Now fast forward to December of the same year, December 15th of 2020, we have a solar eclipse again on Sagittarius, right? And for here, for this particular date is what I was researching, is when the official teaser of Let Me In dropped, December 15, 2020. And it was one of those where, because we just had at the beginning of June, right? We had the eclipse in Sagittarius. Then when they debuted, we had the eclipse on Gemini. And then we're moving back to Sagittarius. It literally tells me like, okay, this is where we're going to be highlighted mostly by the audience, right? Here's where we begin to actually really unfold things. So what do? They drop a teaser. They extend beyond their original story. So it's not just for debut. It's kind of like almost really initiating that lore for the people to really grasp, if that makes sense. I hope. Um, so move forward, and the next eclipse doesn't happen till May 26th of 2021, and it's a total lunar eclipse at 5 degrees of Sagittarius. Now, this date, when I pulled this date up for to see, okay, so this was the next eclipse in that axis. What could have happened to Enhypen on this day? And I was gagged because this was when Border Carnival, that album hit Billboard 200 at spot number 18. And they were also, doing ongoing promotions and stuff like that. But because the eclipse was on the seventh house of what I'm considering the audience, it was peak visibility. So the moon was on the opposite house that originally was from their debut. So now their effort, their work, their image was being reflected, right? So it just kind of like amplified them as a group as well. And kind of because it is the sign of Sagittarius, and Sagittarius is a very like global um sign, it kind of gave them that global recognition markers, so like it it helped with really kind of pushing them out of that like local box and really into more of the global market. So again, I'm not saying that the eclipse caused them to be on the billboard. It's just it again, it's funny to see how the astrology played out, right? A moment where you could expect something reflecting back to you as a group, and you land on the billboard charts, really. So it just kind of became that public moment. And fast forward to June 10th, of 2021, we do have a solar eclipse at 19 degrees of Gemini. And I was like, what do you mean? Like literally every time during the 2021 cycle, or just through every eclipse, there was something that was happening to this group. And uh with the annular solar eclipses, this is where you actually see almost like that ring of fire, like that thin line with the eclipses, which I think, if I'm not mistaken, we saw it on one of the intros. So it's not like fully blacked out the sun, but you have that orange ring around the sun, right? So they launched a bunch of things. I think they launched also, what was it? They launched like their own not variety show, what's it called? Um I don't think I wrote down their series, but they launched like their own like show. And also on top of that, they hit the million seller milestone, which again, taking into consideration that this eclipse was in the Gemini sign. Gemini does rule media, episodic content, daily visibility, and just like personality driven formats. So it it kind of made sense of them being like, okay, so now we're just gonna release like our episode content. I can't. Yeah, I don't see that I wrote down the name, but if you're a fan, you probably know what I'm talking about. Anyways, fast forward to December 4th of 2021, we have a total solar eclipse at 12 degrees of Sagittarius. And the other thing that I was like, what the heck? Was that they actually received an award for can't remember right now what was the actual specific award show for them, but again, awards are like an institutional like validation to your hard work, and that's why I feel like groups are always striving to be able to receive these, um, it's kind of like almost a you're in the room now acknowledgement to a group. And so when you see the timeline of, you know, their beginning milestones, it repeatedly hit the first house and the seventh house, the Gemini and Sagittarius axis. That defines again their identity and myth, curiosity and belief, the audience mirror, and the narrative arc. And again, that's why I keep saying that I love to see the internal pitch to Enhypen to begin with, because if they plan this, then this is how astrology should be used, as a cultural like timing lens, right? Not just as a belief system, because I do love my, um what is it called? Natal astrology, right? Where I'm like, oh, so you're a Sagittarius sun, Gemini moon, you know, oh, you have these quirks, blah blah blah, and whatnot. And I do love doing those things, but what really excites me the most is being able to identify the astrology, reflect on it, and really see how it lands in the what is it that I'm trying to say, in the great scheme of things, where you can kind of see how it plays out or how to anticipate it, right? Because again, you can't always be like, one, I'm not a predictive prediction astrologer. I've predicted some stuff. I will tell you this. I have predicted some stuff. And I it was scary that I was right. So I don't like doing predictions. They were good. They weren't bad predictions. They were like, oh, you're gonna do this by then, or like this is gonna happen by then. Um, so I've had like really good predictions that have landed accurately. Um, but I'm not like super I don't do them often, so I can't really give you like, oh, I have a 100% track record for predictions or stuff like that, because I don't do them that often. But um, what I do love is using astrology as a cultural timing lens and as a planning tool, right? So like the way that I see this within hyphen is that if astrology was used, they really were like, okay, let's kind of tap into this energy. Um, because during these times where eclipse season is happening, things can happen to the group. So that's where I am going to take a minute to pause, because I've been talking probably for too long. And then I'm going to try and jump into the second part, which is their comeback. I'm gonna try and fit it in this video. If it's not fitted into this video, then there's gonna be another video. But I'm gonna take a pause. I'm gonna take a break, and I will be right back. All right, so let's get back into it. I'm gonna try and fit as much as I can for the comeback on this second half of the video. I just needed a little break, guys, because I'll be yapping away sometimes. But anyways, so I want to zoom out for you a little bit, and just a quick disclaimer. So I'm going to be talking about the announcement that was made for the comeback. Now, on Weavers, it does have a timestamp of December 14, 9 a.m. I'm pretty positive that's my time zone's timestamp. Um, if it is, then it would make sense for this chart to for that announcement to have been on December 15 at midnight, if it was 9 a.m. on my time when this was posted, December 14th. So I'm going by this chart. I could be wrong, but I'm just going to tell you how this shows up for me using that chart. So the announcement drops. This chart has a Virgo ascendant with a lot of Sagittarius energy sitting at the fourth house. And from what we know on the Enhypen debut chart, they have Sagittarius placements and also Gemini placements, which again will impact some, like this actual chart really directly impacts their debut chart. And I will explain myself, because even if astrology isn't your thing, from a strategic point of view, it'll still make sense. So this chart has Virgo rising. And if you know, the Virgo archetype is very precise, is very picky about what it wants to say and do. It's planning. It's we know exactly what we're doing, and it's not about being the loudest in the room or being having messy energy. It's very controlled. It wants to make sure that you receive the information that it wants you to receive. Which, going back to the announcement, right? We're excited to announce the release of the new album, the date, right? With an online and in-person fan showcase. Then they tell you the concept. Oh my god, sorry. Tells you the concept behind this part of their lore, how to pre-order, album release, fan showcase. Very, very specific. They're not telling you like the whole storyline. They're not giving you the whole storyboard. They're being very specific about what you need to know. Enough information of what you need to know, and that's it. Period. Very Virgo-esque. So right away, it's not about creating hype, but there is intention behind it. So when you look at the chart, you have Sun, Mars, and Venus all in Sagittarius, which again, I said that they are a Sagittarius group. So this is very important to them. So what this tells me is that they're not, this announcement of the comeback for this day wasn't trying to push something new for shock value. Yes, it's going to create excitement if they're your old group or something like that, or a group that you love, but it's more about re-anchoring the group at their core of their lore or myth, right? Whatever you want to call it. So it's like saying, before we move forward, let's make sure that the root of the story is pretty solid. All right. And I feel like that is the case also with like just giving you a hint of what giving you the name of the album and the concept behind it. Now, a really important factor to this is this 29 degrees Mars in Sagittarius. So 29 degrees is the energetic degree, right? It's that big, very important before a planet shifts onto the next sign. So that degree is very, let's wrap things up, right? There's something that we are ending, a chapter that we are closing, right? Before we start a new one. And so this tells me that it is their way to properly like close this chapter. And another thing that I would like to point out is that it is making a square to Neptune and Saturn in Pisces for the announcement. And so what this tells me with this chart, Pisces lands on the 7th house, but if you project this chart onto Enhypens, it lands on their 10th house of career and legacy. So in a way, because of the way the charts are being projected onto each other, for this particular announcement, Pisces is in the 7th house of audience relationship, right? Saturn there is responsibility, its weight, its expectation, and Neptune kind of adds that fantasy projection myth vibe to it. Sorry. So together they're basically saying like, our team really understands the relationship that the group has with the audience, and that it's evolved, right? Because they are a more mature group, but people aren't casually watching them anymore, right? There is a level of expectation here because they have been so good with like implementing the lore and stuff like that. The story really does have a lot of gravity now. So it's not about treating it like a rookie group anymore. This is a long-term asset treatment. So emotionally, also the moon is going to be in Libra at 23 degrees. And what this tells me, it'll be in the 2nd house. So it kind of sets the tone, really. So there's value with bringing or making this announcement during this time. It kind of felt very refined, intentional, and expensive. So like it wasn't to be overwhelming to the fans. It was more of like, here's the information. It was very posh, is what it's giving to me, based on that. It's like, here's what you need to know. Here's how you need to prepare. be prepared. um, so I just it makes sense the level of almost intricacy that even the announcement of the comeback took, right? So now I want to move towards the actual release of the comeback, which is January 16, 2026 at 2 p.m. Korean time. Now, the sin, Vanish. If you notice, this chart also has Gemini rising in the first house. Now, this is pretty crazy, in my opinion, for them to have landed on a Gemini rising chart again. Is This is where I feel like, okay, there's definitely something um kind of interesting about the astrology, right? So again, Enhypen debuted with a Gemini rising. Gemini is how this group functions, right? The duality of the group, the evolution, the constant movement, the story that just keeps constantly unfolding um into just one identity for the group. So now, because the debut was in Gemini rising and this comeback is Gemini rising, it tells me that this era is still playing by the group's original rules. So this is the next chapter, right? Now, the moon for this debut, I mean, for this comeback is also going to be in Sagittarius. So if we go back to the chart of Enhypen, their sun is in the seventh house. So again, the seventh house is the audience house. So emotionally, this comeback is asking the audience to engage with meaning, with belief and story. So not just to pay attention to sound or visuals, but there is more meaning behind it. There's going to be a much deeper emotional contract than, here are some tracks, enjoy it. So just keep in mind that it's going to be, I feel like for this comeback in particularly, very emotional. And I don't mean like boohoo crying, but like it's going to say a lot, if that makes sense. Now, another thing I want to talk about is that they also have another stellium here in the eighth house of Capricorn. And again, we're hit with a Capricorn stellium and energy, and all in the eighth house, which it's not, like I said, the eighth house is very a dark house, in the sense of like it, rules things like taboo, power dynamics, trauma and stuff like that. So it's not like light energy, but it's also not casual energy. And because it is a house that is in Capricorn, it's very disciplined, it's very structured. Um, it wants a legacy, long-term thinking. And so if you combine that Capricorn archetype and the eighth house representation of intensity, transformation, power, attachment, and stuff that just gets under people's skin, you see that it's nothing that is going to be just for hype or for rowdiness or to just, um, to what is it? The word that I'm trying to say. Like it's not, it's very much intentional is what I'm trying to say. So it's meant to pull people even deeper into the Enhypen lore. Um, so they really are trying to seal that themselves as the like very unforgettable. Like legacy is very important for this comeback. And then you also have Venus and Jupiter right here, right next to each other. I know they're not in the same sign, but they're very loosely conjunct. And whenever you combine Venus and Pluto, there's like this classic fixation energy there where when visuals and aesthetics don't no when visuals and aesthetic don't just look good, they will literally like stick. And by stick I mean there's gonna be a, and I think um, one of our fangirls member was sending, like, the pictures or, like, the pictures from the fangirls account for their teasers, and they look amazing. Um, it's, like, dark, magnetic, you know, and so that's that Venus Pluto energy. So I feel like these are like I've never experienced an Enhypen comeback. So please tell me if this kind of feels very almost like out of teaser images, like one of the best. That's just astrologically what I'm taking from this comeback. Um So there's definitely going to be a lot of Enhypen talk right after their comeback. I'm very confident about that. Um, so again, Saturn gives structure, Neptune gets that atmosphere and myth. So what you get really is a lore, a fantasy that is very controlled, right? And a very intentional lore. So this is the kind of era that people will probably argue about, analyze, and um like really dig into to the point where it's just gonna constantly come back, if that makes sense. Um because again, we do know that tension is kind of built into the concept of the group and into the lore of it. So it tracks really. So what is this comeback going to mean for Enhypen? If we zoom out a little bit, right, and talk about the group itself, when this comeback happens, Enhypen is still going to be in their fifth year, astrologically, right? This puts them in a sixth house perfection year. Um, Let me remove transits so I can kind of give you guys an idea. Okay, so at the time of inception or the time of debut, they were in a first house year. So after they turned one, they move into a second, right? So one, 2, 3, 4, 5. That puts them in a sixth house year. So right now, because it hasn't been November yet, they're still in a fifth house year. Now, with Scorpio themes running underneath everything, it's going to definitely be a work era, a pressure era, a refinement era. So Scorpio will bring the intensity and focus, and the sixth house is the constant repetition, discipline, and labor. So internally for the group, this isn't going to be a coasting phase. Like this is really going to put them to work. This is where expectations are high and precision matters, and where the group is really going to have to like be prepared to tighten up, which kind of again lines up very perfectly with the Capricorn eighth house theme for the comeback. So it's only going to really strengthen the group, but also demand more from them. So really expect this comeback to really set the tone for what the expectation is from them moving forward. um Now, one of the things is that for this upcoming year, I feel like it's not going to be a quiet year for them at all. I feel like there's going to be big shifts coming that will affect their identity, their storytelling, and how the audience engages with them. Because later this year, the nodes are going to shift into Leo and Aquarius axis, which it's going to start activating the, if you see here, hold on. So it's going to start activating the third house and the ninth house. Because sorry, these Capricorn placements are shifting over. So the ninth house and the third house. And so this is going to be activating their communication and narrative themes for the group. Their global expansion themes. And then Uranus is going to be, so the planet Uranus right here is going to be entering Gemini in their first house. So Uranus also is a planet that brings a lot of like disruption. But to me personally, it just feels like that will bring on a shift that is going to be more like experimental, a reinventive. Um, so it is going to impact their identity, but here's where I see it happening. So this comeback happens before that shift into um Gemini, right? Because right now it's at 27 degrees of Taurus and it's still retrograde, but it is going to make its way to Gemini, right? Which is their identity. So it's going to happen. This comeback is going to happen before before Uranus moves into Gemini, which means it's going to deepen the bond with the audience and it's going to clarify the story. It's going to stabilize their image as Enhypen. So moving forward, after I think, when does Uranus shift into Gemini? One second, guys. I'm going to check my calendar. I think it's in April. Yes, end of April. It moves into Gemini. So if I am predicting anything, is that after April, if we do have another comeback or stuff like that, there is going to be some sort of um, new concept um, that we are being prepared for with this comeback, if that makes sense, right? Because Uranus is going to bring experimentation, reinvention, and disruption to their identity. But this is the step that this is the step that they take before they throw this new experimentation, reinvention, and disruption to the public. So they're anchoring themselves in this change before, you know, people like freak out, if that makes sense. So again, this comeback is not, like I said, about chasing hype, about chasing attention. It's really securing their position in the industry. And it takes their lore, their mythology, intention from the debut chart and move it into the next chapter, which is something a little bit more mature and more controlled and intentional for them as a group. And so that's why I'm less interested in asking, will this be successful? The better question that I do want to ask is, does this comeback set Enhypen to carry up their story into the next phase in their career? Right? Because we do have a lot of energy being impacted to their what's called the angle houses, which is their first, fourth, seventh, and 10th houses, which is that mutable cross that they have. And so, um, is this comeback going to carry that story into their next phase of their career? And based on the timing, I'm very confident and I'm answering yes. Not because it's loud or everywhere, but because the timing it's placed very correctly, it's happening very correctly. And I feel like with the astrology, it is making sure that they take that momentum and turn it into longevity. So, you know, I'm really confident that that is really going to highly like really impact um their journey. Um because once they do hit that 6th year, come November 2026, they're going to be in a 7th house year. And I won't say anything just yet because I only peeked at the astrology. I haven't really sat down with it, but just know that this comeback is the prep before something even bigger come third, maybe fourth quarter, maybe second quarter. I'm not familiar with the group and I haven't been tracking them for their longevity like that to be like, oh yes, they tend to come back during these times and whatnot. But I will say this is the little sprinkle, the little prepare yourselves for something even bigger after this comeback. So that is what I have for y'all today. Um, I hope this made sense. um, you know, I just found it really interesting that they have received so many like during their first couple of months of a rookie group, um, really were impacted by the eclipses. Their chart is wild. Like, I could give you guys more insights. It's just it does take time to really sit down and double check the dates, double check the timing, make sure I have correct times and stuff like that. Um, this is something that I like to really investigate. I do more of an investigations when I'm looking into groups. And the fact that this group has been out for so long, I've been having to track a lot of stuff. So I wanted to at least get the debut, the stuff that I found really interesting with the eclipse energy, and then um their upcoming comeback and how powerful that is also being for them. But again, if you want to leave with this prediction, is that this comeback is just a sprinkle for the fandom, before something even bigger. And I feel like what's really gonna hit is anything after um their upcoming anniversary, which is in November. So after that anniversary, best believe the little experimentation is when it might be settling in more, for sure. Because once they enter a seventh year, it's you are going to be the um what is it? Not the deciding factor, but you guys are going to be for sure like the engine behind their success. Not saying that the fans make the group, but you do as a fandom, right, have a huge involvement in how the group succeeds. And so um they themselves, with their skills, with their talent, will show up here. But the anchor is the fandom, right? And so I feel like come next birthday for them, um, it's going to really like push them more, if that makes sense. I'll leave you with that. But I know this was a long video, so I'm sorry if it was a little bit too long than normal. If this is your first time being here, welcome. Um, this is really much what you get with K-pop astrology here for the fangirls. My segment of the K-pop astrology. And if you want to like hop on our journey of Enhypen, and make sure to check out the Enhypen playlist. We are looking into getting into the anime. I don't have time right now to read the lore webtoon, but Kavaya, our other fangirl member, is I think rereading the Enhypen lore. I think she's finishing Anteam, and then she'll reread Enhypens. But if she does, I'm gonna get the cliff notes from her, for sure, because I am interested in stuff like that, and I'm really excited to get into the anime. Uh, so yeah, I mean, this is just like a little glimpse of what I could bring to y'all astrologically with them. Um, Again, if you guys are interested in any other reading for any other comeback, whether it's can happens next comeback or any other group, feel free to let me know in the comments. I am going to start introducing polls for Patreon to kind of like prioritize which groups I am going to front load um for my K-pop astrology videos. So if you do have a request or would like to vote on who's next, I will probably be doing those on Patreon. And I'll be adding more stuff. Also, we do have a Discord. Um, it's linked somewhere, but send me a message if the link is expired, because sometimes it does that, even though I put to never expired the link. But we do have a little section where you can nerd out with me, astrologically. So if you have any other things that I did not mention that I might have missed, please let me know. Because I do love to nerd out astrologically. But thank you so much for hanging out with me thus far, and I will catch you guys on the next K-pop astrology video. Bye.